Welcome back. In this video, we'll look at the lungs and we'll look at how they are used for breathing. As you watch this video, your body is breathing without you even thinking about it. We need to breathe so that our bodies can get oxygen. And you've probably noticed that when your body is working hard, you tend to breathe faster. This is because your body needs oxygen to release energy. Our body gets the energy that it needs by breaking down a sugar called glucose. There is glucose in our food, and when we eat it, our body breaks the glucose down, and this releases the energy that's inside the glucose so that our body can use the energy. In order to break the glucose down, our body also needs oxygen, and this process is called respiration. And respiration is the reason that we need to breathe faster when we're doing exercise. We haven't got enough time to cover respiration in lots of detail today, but if you want to learn more about it, then I recommend that you check out this video, which is linked below. So if you're new here, welcome to BioSmash. I'm Jo, I'm a science teacher, and I'll help you understand biology better. When we breathe, air moves in and out of our lungs. And here's a diagram of what your lungs look like. Air is a mixture of lots of different molecules all moving around together. And one of those molecules is oxygen. So when we breathe in, oxygen enters our body. And this oxygen then travels down to our lungs. The oxygen enters the lungs by travelling down a tube called the trachea. The trachea then branches off into two smaller tubes, each of which is called a bronchus. So the oxygen travels down the bronchus. And the bronchus then branches off into really narrow tubes called bronchioles, and the oxygen then travels down the bronchioles. And here I've zoomed in on a section of the lung so you can see the oxygen particles travelling down the bronchiole. Now the bronchioles end in tiny little air sacs called alveoli, and if you have one of them, it's called an alveolus, so I've labelled one of them here. This diagram shows you the alveoli more closely, so I've labelled an alveolus. And each alveolus is wrapped in blood vessels, so the blood vessels bring blood to the lungs so that the blood can pick up the oxygen that's moved into the lungs and take it off around the body. I've drawn a diagram of the alveolus so that we can look at diffusion happening in more detail. This pale pink section is the alveolus, or the air sac, and the tube going into it is the bronchiole. You can also see the blood vessel which is wrapped around the alveolus, and it's got little red blood cells inside it. So the darker pink liquid inside the blood vessel is the blood, and I've also labelled a red blood cell. Red blood cells look like this, and their job is to carry oxygen around the body. The oxygen molecules bind to the red blood cell, a bit like people sitting on a rubber dinghy. So let's imagine that we've just breathed in and the oxygen is about to enter the alveolus. We now have lots of oxygen molecules inside the alveolus. Because there's lots of oxygen, we say that there is a high concentration of oxygen inside the alveolus. So let's add a label to remind us that there's a high concentration of oxygen in that part. If you look at the top of the picture, you can see I've drawn an arrow to show the blood is coming into the blood vessel and going around the alveolus. So the blood flows in at the top. And because the blood is moving, the red blood cells flow around the alveolus, a bit like the one shown in this picture. So the oxygen is inside the alveolus and the red blood cells are inside the blood vessel and they're moving around it. And remember, the blood flows through a one-way system, so it comes in at the top and then goes out at the bottom. So because the blood is moving so quickly, at any one time there's not much oxygen inside the blood, so we can say that there's a low concentration of oxygen inside the blood and a high concentration of oxygen inside the alveolus. When we've got a high concentration of particles in one area and a lower concentration of particles in another area, the particles will always move from where there is a higher concentration of them to where there is a lower concentration of them. And if you've watched my other videos, you might know that this is called diffusion. And if you haven't watched my other video on diffusion, you might want to check it out before you go any further, and the link is below. So in the alveolus, the oxygen will diffuse from a higher concentration in the alveolus to a lower concentration in the blood. If we need to describe that in writing, we can write in the lungs, oxygen diffuses from a higher concentration in the alveolus to a lower concentration in the blood. And if you want to, you can pause the video now so that you can write that down and learn it. And as it diffuses, the blood carries the oxygen off so that it can be taken to where it's needed around the body. Before we finish this video, it is important that we just mention that as well as breathing in oxygen, our bodies also breathe out carbon dioxide. And if you've watched the video about mitochondria, you'll understand why. So here's a picture of carbon dioxide. And because we breathe carbon dioxide out, it moves in the opposite direction to oxygen. So you can see that the carbon dioxide is coming to the alveolus through the blood, and then it diffuses into the alveolus and out through the bronchiole. And here's a sentence describing that. In the lungs, carbon dioxide diffuses from a higher concentration in the blood to a lower concentration in the alveolus. So it's the opposite of oxygen. And because the carbon dioxide gets breathed out after it gets into the alveolus, this makes sure that the concentration of carbon dioxide in the alveolus remains low. And to draw all of that together, I've just drawn a quick sketch showing that oxygen is coming in at the same time that carbon dioxide is going out. Well done for reaching this point. I've made it a quiz so that you can test how much you've remembered and understood. So there are 4 different questions coming up. In the first question, you'll be given 4 different words. You need to put them in order to describe the journey of oxygen as it travels into the lungs. And those 4 words are bronchus, trachea, alveolus, and bronchiole. For the second part of the quiz, you need to identify in each sentence whether the missing word is oxygen or carbon dioxide. Here's our first sentence. So something is breathed in and something is breathed out. So on each of those lines, you either need to write or say oxygen or carbon dioxide. The next one is something is carried to the alveoli by the blood. So is that oxygen or is it carbon dioxide? And here's our third and final sentence. So something diffuses out of the alveoli into the blood. What's this one? I'm about to put the answer up, so if you're not quite ready yet, then do pause the video if you need a bit more time to think. So let's start by looking at this question. Put these in order to describe the journey of oxygen as it travels into the lungs. So when you breathe in, oxygen will go into your mouth and then it will go down your windpipe, and when it does that, it's moving down your trachea. After the trachea, there comes the bronchus. And after travelling through the bronchus, the oxygen travels down the bronchioles, which are the thinner tubes. And after the bronchiole, it's the alveolus, which is the little air sac at the end. Now let's fill in the gaps. So oxygen is breathed in and carbon dioxide is breathed out. So if we think of the alveoli air sacs, the blood is carrying carbon dioxide to them and it carries oxygen away from them. So carbon dioxide is carried to the alveoli by the blood. And then the final one, it is oxygen that is moving from the alveoli into the blood, because the blood will then carry the oxygen off around the body to where it is needed. I'm building a selection of resources in the online shop which will help you to learn keywords and definitions, so check those out if you think they'll be helpful. Well done you've reached the end of the video. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please do click like or subscribe. And if you want to, you could check out these videos to help you smash more of your biology revision. Hope to see you again soon.